premature, but thank you. Okay, so this is from the narrative. Set in Birmingham. And it's about strange things that happen in back alleyways and wasteland areas of the city. So the kind of thing that we could bring around here before this was built over in the Longbridge. How about that? Is that better? Yeah? Better? Okay, alright. So the protagonist, Andy, comes home and discovers that he's been followed by a member of the Narrow Folk called Bex, and she's brought trouble with her. Andy's flat overlooked the back of the block where there was a small patch of lawn and some shrubbery before the long rectangular line of residence garages, and a drive lit with security bollards which were just starting to flicker into life in the gathering gloom. Two men stood in the middle of the lawn, their shadows stretching long towards the building. The taller was dressed in a long coat that curled about his ankles, and in his hand he carried a staff which gleamed copper red. As Andy watched, the tall man placed the end of the staff against the ground, and with the heel of his hand pushed its entire length into the earth with apparently no more effort than as if it were a drawing pin. One by one, and without any fuss, the security lights began to go out. Yeah, he said slowly, with a suddenly dry mouth. Yeah, those guys. He watched darkness flood across the grass with the fascination of a drowning man watching the tide come in. It's a narrow, he realised. Dear God, he's dropped this whole building into a narrow. You can't know anything about this, insisted Bex. It's impossible. What, you know anything about it, or him doing it? Both. Bex saw that outside the fading light periphery, squat creatures prowled and loped. The shorter man, who looked nothing more remarkable than the average skinhead, made a commanding gesture with one arm, and as the final light was extinguished, the scabags boiled towards the building. The entire block of flats gave a sudden bone-shuddering lurch which threw them off their feet, at the same time as the electricity failed, and the sudden darkness was filled with the creaks and groans of shifting masonry, the crashes of things breaking in distant rooms, and the terrified screams of other residents. For a moment, the only light came from Bex's flashing Santa earrings. She fumbled in her rucksack for a torch and snapped it on, picking out Andy's wide eyes and white face in its jittering light. What's going on? He asked, shocked. Plaster dust had drifted in his hair like maggots. She ignored him. Ways out of here. Fire escape? He shook his head. The block's only 3 stories. It doesn't have one. Just the stairs. They ran to the open front door. The stairwell landing light was swinging crazily and long, deep cracks were opening up in the brickwork. From below came the sounds of breaking glass, more screams, and the strange ululating cries looping upwards. Bex tried to slam the door, but it had been left open when she'd come barging in, and now its frame was twisted out of true. It would have shut properly, never mind the lock. What's going on? He repeated. Monsters are eating your neighbours, she replied harshly. You really want to stop asking me that question. Windows! He shouted, snapping out of his paralysis. The bedroom windows are on the side of the building. There's just some bushes and then the fence into next door. But that's got to be 2 stories and they'll be down there too. God, I hate flats. Do you have a better idea? She thought furiously. Where's your kettle? Oh, you want to make tea? Brilliant! Why don't we distract them with some fucking fairy cakes as well? Andy, you're becoming hysterical. Don't make me slap you. Bex made it into the kitchen as half a dozen scabags emerged onto the landing. They sniffed around briefly before scrambling into the flat, hooting triumphantly. Andy slammed the lounge door shut and dragged the settee across it, piled both chairs on top for good measure, and retreated to the kitchen. He attempted to barricade the door there too, but there was nothing anywhere near as heavy, and the best he could do was to brace his back against it. Thuds and crashes reverberated through the flimsy wall. It sounded like his barricade was holding for the moment, and he had a sick feeling that it might not be for very long. Bex had put the kettle on and was tapping her foot impatiently. Damn these bloody eco-boil things! There was a stupendous noise in the other room, an apocalyptic rending and splintering of wood. It sounded like they were clawing through the very walls. The kitchen doors rang from the other side, making him lurch to keep his balance. Sorry, Bex said, that'll have to do. She climbed up onto the draining board, kettle in one hand, and booted at the lock of the window above the sink. It crashed open in a blast of frigid air and broken glass, and she peered downwards, offering a quick prayer of thanks to the God of cheap coloured blazing. Something in the darkness below stared up at her hungrily with flat, shining eyes. The kitchen door was rammed again, harder this time, and began to open slowly against Andy's weight. His trainers lost their grip and slipped against the linoleum floor. Claw-tipped arms snatched and flailed in the gap. Bex upended the kettle out of the window, and the scavag below gave a bubbling screech, thrashing away into the shrubbery. She turned to grin crazily at Andy, laughed, "Remember, I only boil as much as you need," and dropped out of the window. He was too busy wondering if she'd injured herself in the two-storey fall to defend himself from the creature which burst through the door and reared up at him, howling. Its wrinkled snout lunged at his throat, but he got his hands up in time to grip its head, even as it overbore him and drove him against the edge of the sink. Pain flashed on his kidneys. Its flesh felt cold and slick, like old portmanteau, and its mismatched teeth stank of garbage. Claws were opening up his shoulders. More wriggling shapes clustered in the doorway, eager to join the bloodletting, but frustrated by the confined space. What he could think to do was squeeze its head as hard as he could, and maybe try and gouge out those glittering obsidian eyes of his thumbs. He imagined his fingers as teeth, and pushed inwards as hard as he could, not just physically, but with the strength of his terror and rage, until it felt like his fingers had penetrated its very skull, and there was a sense of tremendous pressure building rapidly to such an intensity that things deep inside the creature began to twist and rupture. It immediately tried to escape, keening in agony, but Andy held it fast as its limbs twisted and snapped, thrashing as it died, and finally it slid off him in a shaving mass. The creatures in the doorway paused, uncertain. Breathing hard, he climbed backwards up onto the kitchen counter, his eyes riveted on them. "You too," he promised. "Every single one of you." Then his foot caught on the draining board, and he fell backwards out of the window. They clambered over the fence beside the row of garages and into the alley beyond. The darkness behind them was filled with the noises of confusion more than pursuit, but they both knew that the respite was only momentary. Bex looked left and right, trying to get her bearings. "Northfield, Northfield, Northfield," she muttered to herself, and then turned to him. "How far are you from the rain?" "What rain?" he panted. "The river rain!" Her voice was heavy with scorn. "Oh, of course. Why would you know anything about where you live?" Turning right, but only because it seemed slightly more downhill than the alternative, she trotted away. "Birmingham doesn't have a river," he protested, following. "It has 3, she snapped it over her shoulder. It only took him a dozen paces for him to realise that running was out of the question. The best he could manage was an exaggerated broken limp. He tried to wipe his hands and his jeans as he went. They were covered in filth from the dead scavag. More dark creatures bounded over the fence behind them, and terror gave new strength to his legs. They came out of the alley onto a residential street, still in Narrows territory, houses dark, streetlights dead, and a cloud-shredded night sky the only source of illumination. Yet even here the scavags shunned such openness, flitting in the shelter of house porches, leapfrogging over gates and hedges. They began to outflank Beck and Bex easily. The only thing that helped him was the fact that they were heading steadily downhill. Beck sped ahead, little more than a scrap of shadow. "Not again," she cried. "Not this time. Not him, too." Without warning, she dodged left between two houses. A scavag leapt at her. She ducked on the run, and it overshot by inches, claws whickering over the nape of her neck again, and sprawled in the next driveway along. And he fled through the gap. Another back fence, another garden, and suddenly they were plunging down through a narrow belt of trees, knee-deep in freezing water, and collapsing in the far bank of the stream. Andy, wide-eyed with his breath coming in hysterical kitchen gasps, he immediately scrambled to his feet to continue running, but Bex grabbed his arm. "It's okay," she panted. "They can't follow us, look." On the other side of the stream, which itself was only 10 feet or so wide, the scavags were weeping and keen on their frustrated bloodlust. They would dart at the water and then recoil, stymied and enraged, and turn on their fellows instead. "It's the water," she explained. "Free-flowing water carries a lot of energy. It burns them, I think. They won't even jump it, and they could make the distance easily. They're creatures of decay, the scavags, intricately on legs." "How long until they find another way across?" he asked. "Oh, we could always stick around and find out if you're really that interested." Turned out that he wasn't. Anyway, if you want to know what the creatures are, and who's in control of them, and what the hell is going on, this